The steering wheel felt cool and solid under my trembling hands. Through the windshield, the house I grew up in looked exactly the same, bathed in the golden light of a crisp autumn evening. It was a perfect suburban picture, a two-story lie of warmth and belonging. In the passenger seat sat a simple manila folder. It didn't look like much, but inside was a document that represented my entire life's work, the culmination of sleepless nights, rejected loan applications, and a stubborn refusal to quit. It was an acquisition agreement from Orion Dynamics. And on the first page, a number that still didn't feel real, $10 million. This was it. The moment I had dreamed of for years. Not about the money, not really. It was about this walk, up this driveway, to finally show them. To finally prove that my quiet obsession with code, my computer game nonsense, as they called it, was worth something. Worth everything. I took a deep breath, grabbed the folder, and stepped out of the car. Each step up the concrete path felt heavy with the weight of expectation. I opened the front door to the familiar scene, my father, Gideon, reading the paper in his armchair, my mother, Annalise, arranging flowers on the mantelpiece, and my sister, Serafina, scrolling through her phone on the sofa, bathed in its pale blue light. The golden child. "I'm home," I said, my voice tight. My mother glanced up, a practiced, fleeting smile on her face. "Oh, Kaylin. You're just in time for dinner." My father merely grunted from behind his paper. "Actually," I began, holding up the folder. "I have some news. Some really good news." Serafina looked up, her eyes narrowing with an instinctual competitiveness. "Did you finally get a real job?" she sneered. I ignored her, placing the folder on the coffee table. "My company," I said, my heart pounding, "it's been acquired. For a lot of money. This is." But before I could finish, Serafina was on her feet. Her face, usually a mask of curated charm, was twisted with a raw, ugly envy I knew all too well. "Oh, please. Don't act like you're some kind of genius. Dad's been paying your rent for years." "He paid it for 6 months, 3 years ago," I shot back, my patience fraying. "This is real, Sarah. This is everything." "It's nothing," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "You're nothing. You just sit in the dark and type. You think that makes you better than me." I was standing at the top of the main staircase, having backed away from her sudden aggression. "This isn't about you," I said, exhausted. "It's always about you," she screamed, and then she shoved me. Hard. It wasn't a playful push. It was a violent, two-handed assault fueled by years of resentment. My foot slipped on the polished wood. The world tilted sideways. I remember a sickening lurch in my stomach, the sight of the ceiling spinning, and a sharp, explosive crack as my head hit the newel post at the bottom. Then, nothing. Just a deep, silent darkness. The first thing I registered was the smell. Antiseptic and bleach. The second was a rhythmic, insistent beeping that seemed to drill directly into my skull. I pried my eyes open, the fluorescent lights above me blurring into a painful halo. A white ceiling. A white room. Wires taped to my chest. And 4 in my arm. I was in a hospital. "Hey, take it easy." A familiar voice cut through the fog. My best friend, Ronan, materialized at my bedside, his face etched with worry. "Welcome back, buddy." "Ronan. What happened?" My own voice was a dry, hoarse whisper. Ronan's expression darkened. "Serafina happened. You've been out for 3 days. Severe concussion and a fractured wrist. 3 days." The number hung in the air, heavy and unreal. I tried to sit up, a wave of nausea washing over me. My parents. Are they here?" Ronan's silence was the answer. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just handed me a glass of water. The hospital log says they checked you in, Kaylin. And then they left. The words didn't compute at first. Left? How could they leave? Their son was unconscious, hospitalized by their daughter, and they just left? As the sterile reality of the room closed in on me, the years of smaller abandonments, of casual cruelties, began to flood back, each memory a new exhibit in the museum of my pain. The first memory to surface was my high school graduation dinner. I just won a national coding competition, a significant achievement that came with a small scholarship. I remember holding the plaque, the cheap plastic feeling heavy in my hands. My father had glanced at it, given a curt, "That's nice, son," and then immediately turned his attention to Serafina, launching into a booming toast about her mesmerizing stage presence as the lead in the school play. My mother had beamed, raising her glass. "To our star," she declared. My award was never mentioned again. I was a ghost at my own celebration. The beeping of the heart monitor seemed to morph into the sound of a car engine, pulling me into another memory. College. I'd been accepted into a top-tier computer science program, but it was expensive. I asked my parents if they would co-sign a small student loan, just to cover the gap my scholarship didn't. Gideon had scoffed. "A loan for that? It's a dead end, Kaylin. You're throwing money away on a hobby." A month later, on Serafina's 19th birthday, they bought her a brand new convertible. For her social networking needs, my mother had explained brightly. It's important for her to make the right connections. I ended up working 2 part-time jobs, coding for freelance clients between shifts, and sleeping an average of 4 hours a night to make it work. They never asked how I managed. They didn't care. The final memory was the sharpest, the most recent. It was just a few months ago, at a tense Sunday dinner. Gideon was complaining about the financial struggles at Vance Fabrication, the manufacturing company his father had founded. It was his legacy, and it was failing. In the same breath, he'd looked at me, at my simple jeans and t-shirt, and said with a sneer, "I don't know what we're going to do. At least Serafina is a success. And you're still living like a pauper in that tiny apartment." That tiny apartment was where I had written every line of code for the algorithm Orion Dynamics had just paid millions for. It was my lab, my sanctuary, my launchpad. To him, it was just a symbol of my failure. I blinked, the white walls of the hospital room coming back into focus. It was never one single thing. It was all of it. A lifetime of being weighed, measured, and found wanting. A lifetime of being the background noise to Serafina's symphony. And now, they had left me here. Alone. The pain in my head and wrist was nothing compared to the cold, hollow certainty that settled in my chest. I had no family. Ronan watched me, his expression a mixture of pity and anger. He knew the stories. He'd lived through some of them with me in college, shaking his head in disbelief at the blatant favoritism. He had been the one to drive me home from campus during breaks when they'd forgotten. He had been the one who'd celebrated with cheap pizza when I landed my first big freelance gig. "There's more," he said, his voice low. "I think you need to hear it for yourself." He pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. A moment later, my mother's voice filled the quiet room. It wasn't the warm, gentle tone she used for Serafina. It was a voice clipped with annoyance, thin and brittle. "Kaylin, it's your mother. Your father and I are with Serafina right now. She's terribly distraught, just beside herself. Honestly, you know how you get, always pushing her buttons, making everything a competition. It's best if you just sort yourself out. We need to be here for your sister. She's the one who's really hurting right now." The message ended. The silence that followed was deafening. Sort yourself out. The words echoed in the hollow space where my heart used to be. My sister commits a felony, puts me in the hospital, and I need to sort myself out. My mother's words weren't just an excuse, they were a verdict. In the court of our family, I had already been judged, found guilty of the crime of being my sister's victim. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud, violent break, but a quiet, clean severance. The part of me that had spent 29 years craving their approval, hoping for a crumb of affection, simply withered and died. The pain was still there, a deep, throbbing ache, but it was being rapidly replaced by something else. Something cold, sharp, and clear. It was the clarity of a man with nothing left to lose. My focus shifted from the emotional wreckage to the logical reality. This was no longer a family drama. It was a crime scene. It was a legal matter. And it was, I realized with a sudden, chilling certainty, a strategic problem to be solved. I looked at Ronan, and he must have seen the change in my eyes, because he straightened up, his lawyer mode kicking in. My voice, when I finally spoke, was steady. Devoid of the pleading tone it had held my entire life. Ronan, I said. 2 things. First, file the charges against Serafina. Aggravated assault. Go for the maximum. He nodded, a grim smile touching his lips. Already on it. Second, I continued, my mind racing, connecting dots I hadn't seen before. Get in touch with Silas Thorne at Orion Dynamics. His personal line. Tell him the asset is secure, but there's been a complication. I paused, taking a breath. And tell him I'm ready to discuss the strategic value of Vance fabrication. The next 2 weeks in the hospital were a blur of physical therapy for my wrist, neurological checks for the concussion, and a crash course in emotional detachment. The physical pain was a dull, manageable ache. The true battle was being fought over the phone. That's when the flying monkeys descended. The first call was from my Aunt Deirdre, my mother's sister. Her voice was syrupy sweet, dripping with false concern. Kaylin, darling, I was so horrified to hear about your little accident. It wasn't an accident, Aunt Deirdre, I said, my voice flat. Serafina assaulted me. There was a slight pause. Now, let's not use such ugly words. You know how she is, so full of passion. Your family. And family doesn't do this to each other. You're tearing your mother apart, you know. She's beside herself with worry. I almost laughed. Worried? Worried about what? The family's reputation. The inconvenience. It certainly wasn't about the son she'd abandoned in an emergency room. I pictured my mother, Annalise, not wringing her hands with worry for me, but carefully crafting a narrative for her friends, painting Serafina as the tragic victim of a brother's provocation. Think of your sister's future, Kaylin, Deirdre pressed on, her voice taking on a wheedling tone. A criminal record could ruin her life. All her potential, gone. Over a silly squabble. Is that what you want? To ruin your own sister's life? I remained silent. I let her fill the void with more platitudes about forgiveness and the sanctity of family. I analyzed her words, not as a nephew, but as a systems analyst debugging a faulty program. Input, guilt. Expected output, compliance. My new response was to simply terminate the connection. I have to go, Aunt Deirdre, I said, and hung up before she could reply. The calls kept coming. An uncle who I hadn't spoken to in 5 years called to tell me to be a man and handle it privately. A cousin messaged me on social media, posting a long, sanctimonious rant about how blood is thicker than water. Each call, each message, was a coordinated strike, an attempt to gaslight me into believing I was the aggressor, the unreasonable one, the source of all this unpleasantness. They didn't understand. The person they were trying to manipulate no longer existed. He had died on that staircase. The man they were talking to now was someone else entirely. Someone who understood that when a system is fundamentally corrupt, you don't try to fix it from within. You burn it to the ground and build something new on the ashes. With each call, my resolve hardened. My isolation wasn't a punishment, it was a crucible. It was forging me into the weapon I needed to be. They thought they were pushing me into a corner. They had no idea they were just giving me a clearer line of sight. On my last day in the hospital, as I was packing my few belongings into a bag Ronan had brought me, one of the nurses came into my room. Her name was Leona. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, efficient and professional, but with a kindness in her eyes that I had been grateful for over the past 2 weeks. She closed the door quietly behind her. "Mr. Vance," she began, her voice low. "I'm not supposed to do this. It's against policy. But I can't let it go." I stopped packing and gave her my full attention. "I was at the nurse's station the night you were admitted," she continued, her gaze direct. "Your parents were there, talking with the doctor. After the doctor left, I was filing your chart. I couldn't help but overhear what your father said to your mother." She took a breath, as if steeling herself. "He looked at your mom and said, he brought this on himself. Maybe now he'll stop being such a damn disappointment and get a real job. And your mother," she just nodded. "She didn't say a word to defend you." A cold wave washed over me, but it wasn't one of shock. It was validation. It was the raw, unvarnished truth, witnessed by a stranger. It confirmed that the cruelty I had felt wasn't just my own interpretation. It was real. Tangible. "I'm sorry," Leona said gently. "But I also saw them walk out of here 5 minutes later, leaving you in the ICU. They didn't even look back." She hesitated for a moment. "If you need a witness, someone to testify to their character, to their abandonment of you in a critical state, I will do it. Just have your lawyer call me." Tears pricked my eyes for the first time since I'd woken up. They weren't tears of sadness, but of profound gratitude. This woman, a complete stranger, had shown me more compassion and moral courage than my own family had in my entire life. She wasn't just offering a testimony, she was offering proof that I wasn't crazy. That my pain was justified. "Thank you, Leona," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "That means more than you will ever know." She simply nodded, gave my arm a brief, reassuring squeeze, and left the room. I now had more than just a case. I had a cause. Back in my apartment, the same apartment my father had mocked, I felt a strange sense of clarity. It was no longer a place of shame, but my command center. Ronan came over that evening, spreading files across my dining table, which was also my coding desk. "Okay," he said, "all business. The DA is pursuing the assault charges against Serafina. Her lawyer is trying to play it off as a family spat, but the medical reports don't lie. She's in real trouble." "Good," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. Ronan slid a much thicker file towards me. "Now, for the interesting part. I did the deep dive you asked for on Vance Fabrication, and I spoke with Silas Thorne's office." He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "Your dad wasn't just complaining at dinner, Kaylin. His company is a ghost. It's leveraged to the hilt, bleeding cash, and weeks away from total insolvency. They've been desperately seeking a buyer for months." He tapped the top page. "They have one last hope. One single offer on the table to save them from bankruptcy. A buyout proposal from a corporate giant that's looking to acquire smaller, traditional manufacturing assets." I looked at him, the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place in my mind with the cold, satisfying precision of a line of perfect code. I already knew the answer. "Let me guess," I said. "Orion Dynamics." Ronan grinned. "Bingo. And according to Thorne's assistant, the final decision on these smaller acquisitions is being delegated to their new senior strategic advisor, who is tasked with evaluating their long-term viability and synergy with the company's core tech." He let the words hang in the air. For a moment, We just looked at each other, the sheer, staggering irony of the situation settling over us. My father, the man who called my life's work a hobby, was now pinning his entire legacy, his company, his financial salvation, on a decision that would be made by the son he'd called a disappointment. Serafina's freedom and the family's future were now two separate battles, and I was armed to win them both. The plan was no longer just about justice for an assault. It was about a total, systemic correction. It was about demonstrating, in the most undeniable terms possible, the consequences of their actions. My revenge wouldn't be loud or emotional. It would be quiet, corporate, and absolute. It would be the stroke of a pen on a memo, an empire falling not with a bang, but with the silent click of a sent email. If you're finding this story as intense as I am, do me a huge favor and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. And let me know what city you're watching from in the comments below. Every comment helps the story reach more people. Thank you so much for your support. Now back to the story. The day of Serafina's preliminary hearing arrived with a cold, gray drizzle that matched the mood in my soul. I stood in the echoing marble hallway of the county courthouse, Ronan by my side. I wasn't wearing the usual hoodie and jeans my family so despised. I was in a custom-tailored charcoal suit that I'd had made a year ago, anticipating the kind of high-level meetings that were now my reality. It felt like armor. I wasn't nervous. The man who got nervous seeking his family's approval was gone. In his place was someone who felt a profound, chilling sense of purpose. I was here to observe a process, a set of inputs and outputs. A problem to be solved. Then, they arrived. Gideon, Annalise, and Serafina, a tight little phalanx of entitlement, flanked by a slick-looking lawyer. They didn't look worried. They looked annoyed, inconvenienced. Serafina was dressed in a demure white dress, a pathetic attempt to look innocent and virginal. My mother was clutching her arm, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue for effect. My father, Gideon, looked straight at me, his face a mask of stern disapproval. They strode towards us, their footsteps clicking with an unearned confidence. Kaylin, my father's voice boomed, low and intimidating. This has gone far enough. This is your last chance to drop this nonsense before you embarrass this family permanently. The time for that was when you left me unconscious in a hospital, Dad, I replied, my voice even and calm. It seemed to unnerve him more than shouting would have. Serafina let out a theatrical scoff. Oh, look at him, trying to play grown-up in his little suit. Did your little computer game pay for that? She sneered. Annalise chimed in, her voice trembling with practiced fragility. Your sister didn't mean it, Kaylin. She's just emotional. Can't you find it in your heart to forgive? They were performing, playing out the roles they had perfected over decades. The stern patriarch, the fragile mother, the misunderstood princess. And I was meant to play my part, the difficult, ungrateful son who eventually caves to maintain the family's fragile peace. But the script had changed. And they had no idea. It's a little late for forgiveness, Mom, I said, looking past her, my eyes fixed on a point down the long hallway. And for the record, yes. My little computer game paid for the suit. As if on cue, footsteps approached, steady, powerful, and deliberate. A tall man in an impeccably tailored navy suit came to a halt beside me, his presence radiating an aura of absolute authority. He was in his 50s, with sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He nodded curtly to me, a silent gesture of support. It was Silas Thorne, the CEO of Orion Dynamics. My family fell silent. Their little drama was interrupted by a power they didn't comprehend but instinctively recognized. My father's jaw went slack. He was a mid-level executive who spent his life trying to impress men half as powerful as the one now standing beside me. His face, which had been red with anger a moment ago, drained of all color. Mr. Thorne. Gideon stammered, his voice suddenly weak. What what are you doing here? Annalise, ever the one to try and fit a new reality into her old worldview, looked from Silas to me, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. Kaylin, is this your boss? Did you get him to come down here to try and intimidate us? That's a new low, even for you. The accusation was so predictable, so perfectly in character, that I almost smiled. They couldn't conceive of a world where I wasn't a subordinate, a failure, a problem. They saw a powerful man and immediately assumed he was my superior. I looked at my mother, my expression unreadable. He's not my boss, Mom, I said, my voice clear and carrying in the quiet hallway. He's my partner. Silas Thorne, who had been observing my family with the detached curiosity of a biologist studying insects, finally turned his gaze upon my father. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the tension like a shard of ice. Mr. Vance, Silas began, not bothering with pleasantries. I believe my board is reviewing the Vance Fabrication acquisition proposal this afternoon. Gideon's eyes widened with a desperate, pathetic flicker of hope. He thought this was a coincidence, a chance to plead his case. Yes, Mr. Thorne. We're very excited about the potential. Silas raised a hand, silencing him instantly. As our new senior strategic advisor, he continued, gesturing almost imperceptibly towards me, and as the architect of the core technology my entire company's future is now built upon, Mr. Vance's, he paused, letting the name hang in the air before clarifying, Kaylin's input on the viability of your company will be decisive. He let the word land, a verbal guillotine. Then, he delivered the final blow, his eyes locking onto mine with a look of grim solidarity. Now, if you'll excuse us, I'm here to ensure my company's most valuable asset is protected from any and all external threats. The hallway, which had seemed so vast moments before, suddenly felt small and suffocating. The reality of Silas Thorne's words descended upon my family, not like a gentle dawn, but like a collapsing building. Gideon was the first to break. The blustering, arrogant patriarch vanished, replaced by a pale, trembling old man. He stumbled backward, his hand flying to his chest as he leaned against the marble wall for support, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The legacy he had failed to uphold, the company that was his only claim to pride, was now subject to the whim of the son he had belittled his entire life. Annalise let out a choked, strangled sob, her perfectly manicured hands flying to her mouth. Her carefully constructed world of appearances, of the perfect family with the golden daughter and the disappointing son, had just been obliterated. The social currency she valued above all else, status, success, appearances, had just been transferred, in its entirety, to me. She was looking at me, really looking at me, for the first time in years, and all she could see was the ghost of her own future. But the most satisfying reaction was Seraphina's. Her smug, condescending smirk didn't just fade, it shattered. Her face crumpled, the mask of the innocent victim melting away to reveal the raw, ugly panic of a cornered narcissist. The game was over. The rules had changed, and she had no idea how to play. Her power, which had always been derived from her status as the family favorite, was now utterly worthless. Their lawyer, who had been watching with a detached professionalism, now looked deeply unsettled. He clearly hadn't been briefed on this particular variable. Ronan, ever the professional, chose this precise moment to step forward. He addressed their lawyer, but his voice was loud enough for all of them to hear. He handed him a crisp new document. "While we're all here," Ronan said smoothly, "this is a notice of a civil suit for full medical costs, emotional distress, and punitive damages. We'll be seeking a 7-figure settlement." He then turned to my father. "And Mr. Thorne, I'm sure your corporate counsel will agree that given today's developments, any further discussion of an acquisition would represent a severe and indefensible conflict of interest." The implication hung in the air, as sharp and final as a death sentence. The deal wasn't just in jeopardy. It was dead. My father pushed himself off the wall, his eyes wild with desperation. He took a staggering step towards me. Son. Kalen, please, he stammered, the word son sounding alien and obscene coming from his lips. We can fix this. We can talk about this. For my entire life, those words would have been a lifeline. A chance to be let back into the fold, to be forgiven for sins I never committed. I had craved a conversation, a moment of connection, for 29 years. But looking at the broken man before me, I felt nothing. Not anger, not pity, not even the satisfaction of victory. I just felt empty. It was the emptiness of a wound that has finally, after a lifetime of infection, been cleansed. I looked at the man I once called father. I looked at the woman who had given birth to me but never truly been my mother. I looked at the sister who had hated me simply for existing. And I delivered my final verdict. You said I deserved it, I said, my voice quiet but firm, each word precisely placed. And you were right. I deserved better. I turned my back on them. On all of it. I walked away, shoulder to shoulder with Silas Thorne and Ronan, down the long marble hallway and out into the clean, cold, drizzling rain. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I was finally walking towards my own future, leaving them behind in the ruins they had built for themselves. Serafina was convicted of assault with a plea bargain that avoided jail time but left her with a permanent criminal record, making her unemployable in any field that required a background check. Vance Fabrication filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy 6 weeks later. I sometimes get calls from unknown numbers that I know are them, but I never pick up. There is nothing left to say. So, Reddit, I have to ask, am I the asshole for systematically dismantling my family's lives after they left me for dead? Let me know your verdict in the comments below. Your engagement truly helps the channel grow. And if you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more content just like this. Thank you for listening.